What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we have more spoilers. I mean, of course, it's Dominaria United spoiler season. Here we are. So we're going to take a look at some of the spoilers that have come out in the last day or two and that we haven't touched on yet on the channel, and unpack them, see if they're any good, see what decks they might work in. I'm going to be focused primarily on Standard because that's where I'm going to be doing a lot of my brewing and whatnot, but at the same time, I will touch on other formats that, you know, when relevant. So I want to start with a card that is incredibly divisive right now on social media, and that is Karn Living Legacy. Before we get into what the card does, I do want to say I have heard some people say that this is possibly the worst Karn that has ever been printed, and I've even heard some people say it's one of the worst planeswalkers ever printed. I don't necessarily agree with that, but they have a point. So Karn Living Legacy is a 4 starting loyalty Karn legendary planeswalker at Mythic for 4. +1, create a tapped Power Stone token. It's an artifact token with tap, add 1 colorless mana. This mana can't be spent to cast a non-artifact spell. Okay. -1, pay any amount of mana. Look at that many cards from the top of your library, then put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay. And then -7. You get an emblem with tap an untapped artifact you control. This emblem deals 1 damage to any target. Okay, so judging a planeswalker based off of the ultimate is generally a fool's errand because it is difficult to get to those, and they tend to be pretty game breaking and definitely game warping when they occur. This is no exception. That -7 is awesome, but let's not judge Karn based on that -7. In a situation where you have a lot of artifacts lying around, that could be incredible. But let's just take a look at the +1, -1. +1, you create a tapped Power Stone token. So if this, this creates a mana rock for you. That's not nothing. It produces an artifact. So if the number of artifacts that you have is something that's relevant, if you're in an affinity situation or something of that nature, okay, great. But the mana is restricted. You're not allowed to cast non-artifact spells with it. So that may sound like you're only allowed to cast artifact spells, but that's not actually how this works. Yes, you can use it to cast artifact spells. You can also use it to activate abilities of artifacts, but you can also use this mana to activate abilities that are not tied to artifacts. So you can use the Power Stone mana to feed into the -1 and dig for whatever you need. So that's that's not nothing. You know, the fact that the Power Stone is limited does suck. That is a problem, because obviously casting non-artifact spells is something we all want to do. You know, if you have another Karn in your hand, if you're trying to ramp up to an Ugin, those Power Stones aren't going to help you, and that's unfortunate. So I think in older colorless decks, which is where this wants to be, I don't know that it's going to be that great, really. It could be okay, but when you have other Karns available to you, like Karn the Great Creator, why in the world would you run Karn Living Legacy? It's just not great. So I do believe this card is lackluster. It is not great, but I think a lot of the hate for it is a little overblown. If Standard has an artifact deck, this could be a useful piece to it. And we've seen a lot of great artifact support pieces in recent memory and as well in Dominaria and some of these spoilers. What we don't have are the artifacts themselves yet. But if Karn is any indicator, maybe we can get there. Just alone, the +1 being an artifact factory, it pumps out artifacts with every +1 you hit. That's meaningful. So there's something to be said for that. But at the same time, you really need to care about the sheer volume of artifacts you have for that to be good. So I think time is going to tell on this card. I do hear what people are saying. And as far as Karns that we've seen, I think this one is pretty underpowered. You know, when we have Karn the Great Creator, you have Karn Liberated, you have some of these other Karns. Heck, even Karn Silver Golem, before his Planeswalker Spark ignited, had some cool stuff you could do with it. But, you know, Karn is a character associated with power. Karn is a powerful character, and this card doesn't really bring that across. This is a utility planeswalker in an artifact shell, and we don't have a good artifact shell for this card right now. And in older formats where we do, I don't think this guy quite cuts the mustard. So If standard artifacts become a thing, Karn becomes a thing. If standard artifacts are not a thing, Karn is a non-starter. But it's an interesting idea, interesting card. The fact that he uses a mythic slot is a little unfortunate. This could have been a rare and it would have been okay, but so be it. Now, next up, I want to talk about a card that is excellent. Full stop. Excellent. And that is a Plaza of Heroes. If you are a commander player, grab as many of these as you have commander decks and you plan on building commander decks because you will want it in every single one of them. So Plaza of Heroes is a land that enters the battlefield untapped that can tap for 1 colorless mana. It can also tap to add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell. So you can use it to get your commander out no matter what your commander's color identity is. Great. You can also tap to add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. So it has kind of a Mox Amber style ability that can give you mana that you can use however the heck you want as long as you currently have a legendary permanent in those colors. Awesome. Again, so once your commander's out, this just becomes a command tower. Sweet. But wait, there's more. Pay 3, tap, exile Plaza of Heroes. Target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So once you have all the mana in the world and you don't need those lands anymore, all of a sudden this one can turn into a combat trick that can keep your commander or a valuable legendary creature alive. And hexproof. It includes hexproof. It's hexproof and indestructible on one thing. It's Tamiyo safekeeping on a land. I think this card is straight gasoline. If a legendary themed deck is a thing in standard, this is absolutely going to fit into it. I think there are actually some decks where you will be running this as a 2 of because you have, 12, 14, whatever legendary creatures or planeswalkers in the deck. Like in Super Friends decks, this thing's great. Because you have a ton of legendary permanents that you're going to be throwing anyway. So you might as well. Like all your planeswalkers are legendary, so go nuts. I think the card's really good. I think this card is just really good. It gives you the mana that you need when you need it. It helps you cast your legendary spells no matter what color they are, and then once they're online, you get access to that color for everything. I think Plaza of Heroes is a slam dunk. This card is incredible. Like, I don't know what else to say. Just do it. Yeah. All right, next up we have Yavimaya Iconoclast. This is a 3/2 elf for 1 and a green at uncommon with kicker for 1 red. So Gruul aggro players rejoice. We have a new tool in the mix. So this is a 3/2 trampler for 2, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it gets +1/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. So it's a 3/2 elf for 2 with trample regardless. That's not bad. I mean, even right on its face, we get a decent body, decent power, and if we spend 3 mana on it, it enters the battlefield as a 4/3 trampler that can attack the turn it drops. That's pretty fantastic. Now, note that +1/+1 is only till end of turn, so it goes back to being a 3/2. So if you spend 3 mana on what ends up being a 3/2, you're not feeling great, but the fact that you get to crash in for 4 right away is pretty sweet. So late in the game, I mean, this kind of operates almost like a dash style effect because you're giving haste if you spend a little extra, but the creature doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't bounce back to hand. You don't sacrifice it, the way that you do with blitz creatures. It has kind of that feel though. So I gotta say, in any super aggressive deck that's running Gruul, Yavimaya Iconoclast is absolutely going to be a part of the mix. So in Gruul decks already, and we have a lot of cool powerful options for those decks. Halana and Elena Partners, Reckless Stormseeker. I mean, so Yavimaya Iconoclast could absolutely slot into that deck as a really solid curve-filling 2-drop, as well as a potential, way to just boost your attack by 4 late in the game when you need to chip in for that last little bit of damage. I think this card's great, actually. It fits that role perfectly. I mean, this is what a really good uncommon ought to look like, in my opinion. And it's just rock solid. And it fits the, it's got the multiple color kicker thing going on, which is something that we're seeing in this set. So it just fits. It's just a good card. It's just good. Like, it's not amazing. I'm not like over the moon. I'm not saying, oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing ever. You need to get it. But like, if you're running green aggro, it's probably worth taking a look, and if you're in green red aggro, there's kind of, I would be shocked if you could find better 2-drops, to be honest. It's just solid. All right, next up, we have Rona's Vortex. And no, that is not 2020. Rona's Vortex is an instant for blue, although let's be honest, did anything, like 2020 was just kind of this vortex of time. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Instant for 1 blue. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. All right, like a half an unsummoned kind of situation, sure. But it can touch planeswalkers, that's neat. If this spell was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. And the kicker is 2 and a black. So for 1 mana, you get to bounce a thing back to your opponent's hand. The fact that you can't touch your own stuff is really a detriment to this card because it does cut some of the flexibility. But the fact that it can touch planeswalkers is really relevant because there are a lot of good 3 and 4 drop planeswalkers running around right now. And being able to just push those back to the hand, get them off the field for a turn might be relevant. So that's something. However, you don't necessarily want to be bouncing planeswalkers a lot because that usually results in your opponent being able to minus them the following turn by dropping them out with a fresh set of counters. So, but in any case, the kicker, however, being able to put it on the bottom of its owner's library. They don't get to pick top or bottom. You just go straight to the bottom. So if they care about their graveyard, sorry, it doesn't matter. It's not even going to exile, which is weird, frankly. It's just tucking it away forever. It's putting them back into the library on the frickin' bottom. There are very few cards in Magic that care about the bottom of the library. That is very rare, and there isn't anything like that in Standard. I believe there's something in Alchemy, but in any event. So for 4 mana, one of which is blue, one of which is black, return target creature, or put target creature or planeswalker on the bottom of its owner's library. That, I mean, I'm trying to think of a... Exile is probably the only way that you can get more out of the game than the bottom of the owner's library. I mean, of course, if they have tutor effects, if they have a way to shuffle, then maybe it'll come back, but in all likelihood, it's just going to be gone for that game. So I think it's a decent, it's a piece of Dimir removal that can also be early tempo. I think it's flexible, it's solid, it gives you what you need. You can get a pesky blocker out of the way early, you can get a pesky planeswalker out of the way, to kind of like put your opponent at a bit of a mana disadvantage by only paying 1, but if you can put all 4 into it, you can just ice something really hard. So this strikes me as decent in like Dimir control or Dimir tempo style builds. Like there might be a home for Rona's Vortex. I like the idea. I do. All right, next up, Keldon Flamesage. 2/3 human shaman for 2 and a red, and this has Enlist. Now, Enlist is a new mechanic. I believe, I don't recall if we've talked about it before, so I'll give you a quick rundown how Enlist works. When you attack with a creature that has Enlist, you have the opportunity to tap another creature you control as long as it is untapped, not attacking, and is unaffected by summoning sickness. So it either has to have haste or has to have been on the field for at least a turn. So, and when you do, you tap that other creature, you add its power to the Enlist creature. So if I have a 2/2 lying around and I attack with a Keldon Flamesage, I can tap that 2/2 and turn Keldon Flamesage from a 2/3 into a 4/3. So we're adding power to the attack. So, okay, but then Keldon Flamesage has an additional ability. When this card attacks, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is Keldon Flamesage's power. You may exile an instant or sorcery card with mana value X or less from among them, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So in a situation where we can load this thing up with a ton of power, and for the record too, the most obvious way to do what this deck or what this card is wanting you to do is tap a very large creature to enlist onto the Keldon Flamesage. That way, when you attack, you can be attacking with like 9 power. Look at the top 9 cards. You get to cast an instant sorcery with mana value 9 or less from them. Go grab your ultimatum if you're in an older format, or whatever big bomb spell you want. Unfortunately, Magma Opus is going to be leaving us, but I'm sure something will, Herd Migration might fall into, in any event, there are a lot of big, powerful spells out there. You then get to cast that card for free in the declare attackers step of combat. So if you can hit an ultimatum or something, just a big bomb powerhouse spell in that moment, all of a sudden the attack may actually become irrelevant, frankly. Or you could wipe your opponent's board. You can do a lot of stuff can happen as a direct result of hitting this ability. It's giving you card selection, but the higher the power gets, it's also giving you free spells. When you get free spells, good stuff happens. It's usually good. I think this card is actually really solid. The other thing I want to call out, yes, this works well with it synergizes with itself. The Enlist buffs the ability. That said, other combat tricks or equipment or spell or auras or whatever else, like Anthem effects even, anything that buffs power will buff that second ability. Keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to be enlisting in order to cast big stuff off the top of your library. So I think Keldon Flamesage is a very interesting card. I'm definitely going to be building some stuff around it. I think this card is going to be good in formats where you have big hits. If you have 5 and 6 drop instants and sorceries that change the face of the battlefield, then you're going to be spinning into them with Keldon Flamesage a lot, and that deck is going to be very potent and very powerful. So I like the idea. I like the concept. This actually gives me kind of Dreadhorde Arcanist vibes, whereas the Dreadhorde Arcanist was pulling spells out of your graveyard based on its power, whereas this is ripping them off the top of your library. So I think the top end on Keldon Flamesage is actually pretty darn good. To be honest, even if you're not enlisting, just attacking with a Keldon Flamesage and getting a free play with fire or a free lightning strike off the top, that's not bad. Like, if you get lucky with the hit, I mean, you can do a lot worse than that. So I think this card is just good. Like, just straight up good. It's free casting. If I get a chance to free cast, I'm happy. So yeah, good card. Good stuff. All right, next up, we have Threats Undetected. There is a whole sequence of cards throughout Magic's history that include ladies laying on their side tinkering with stuff. And that, of course, started with the original art of Gifts Ungiven from the original Kamigawa block. And Threats Undetected is a part of that cycle. It's the newest edition, so here we go. Sorcery for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 4 creature cards with different powers and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library and put the rest into your hand. So this is like one of the worst tooth and nails ever printed. Granted, it only costs 3, so you do get to effectively draw 2 cards for 3, but your opponent has agency over what cards those are. And you have to have not only 4 creatures with different names, but they all have to have different powers in order for you to grab 4 cards with Threats Undetected. And if you grab fewer than 4 cards, say you grab 2 and then you fail to find on the other 2, your opponent takes those 2 cards and shuffles them into your library and you get nothing. So those kind of cheeky shenanigans that we sometimes see with Gifts Ungiven in older formats especially don't work with Threats Undetected. They do work with Gifts Ungiven because the chosen cards go into your graveyard. And so cards with flashback or cards that, you know, leverage the graveyard in some way, you can use Gifts Ungiven just to put cards in your graveyard. Threats Undetected does nothing like that. You can't fill your yard with these creatures. If Threats Undetected said your opponent chooses 2 cards, you put them in your graveyard and the other 2 go into your hand, totally different story. The card's amazing. As it stands, this card is really, I don't see it. I think this card is actually really bad. I mean, yes, in a green aggro deck or I mean, maybe in like that Grill aggro deck, it could be okay because you do get an opportunity to grab, I mean, you draw 2 creature cards from it, but again, your opponent gets to choose which ones. And the more I look at it, the less I like it, because in those aggro decks, on 3, if you're spending 3 mana, you want to be impacting the board. You want to be putting power on the board. This doesn't do that. So this is wanting to be in some kind of like mid-rangey combo deck where you can get a little cheeky and maybe confuse your opponent and have them give you what you need because it looks unthreatening. I don't know. It's mind games. This is the kind of thing for Commander that I think would be great because you can strike a deal with somebody and say, okay, as long as you give me this one thing, then I'll give you something, or I won't attack you next turn, or whatever, you know, however you wheel and deal in Commander. Threats Undetected could definitely help with that, but I don't see this working in a competitive 60 card format. It just doesn't give you what you want for aggro. In mid-range situations, yeah, it draws you some cards, but you're not going to get the one you want most of the time. So I don't know. It's drawing 2 cards for 3 in green, and they're guaranteed to be creatures, I guess. But I don't know. I'm not feeling it. Interesting design. I might eat my words on that. Actually, you know what this feels like? This reminds me a lot of Wish from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Wish was a card for 3 that allowed you to cast any spell you wanted from outside the game that turn. So you could have an amazing sideboard full of all kinds of crazy spells, and you could cast any one of them if you had a Wish in hand. But Wish saw no play in competitive because it would effectively draw you a card it would tutor you a card of your choosing once, but it costs 3 mana. So if there's a 4-drop in my sideboard that I want to cast off a wish, I need to spend 7 because I need to pay for the wish and then pay for the spell. Threats Undetected is giving me that vibe, except with Wish, you got to pick whatever you wanted. Like, whatever your combo piece was, you could just play it. Threats Undetected, you're spending the 3 mana, but your opponent has an opportunity, if they see what you're up to shut you down before you draw the card. To be fair, Threats Undetected, you can cast the spell the following turn, whereas with Wish, you had to cast it right away. So I'm not saying that it's a perfect comparison, but that's the kind of power level that I see. And Wish is a card that we do see in some like crazy older combo decks where there are like 0 and 1 drops that you're pulling out with it. But in newer formats where you're wanting to hit 3+ mana value things, it just doesn't really work. Threats Undetected, I feel like it's very similar, where in a competitive format, it doesn't do enough the turn it hits, and there's a possibility that the value you get off it is not going to be that great. I think that's going to happen way too much. Anyway, interesting design. Clearly, I have thoughts about it. It's a thought-provoking card, but I don't think it's going to see any meaningful play. All right, next up, Aron, Benalia's Ruin. This is a Phyrexian human, 3/3, legendary, for white, black. So it's a 3/3 for 3 at uncommon, Phyrexian human with menace. Presumably a sleeper agent, Phyrexian human. So it's a human with menace, 3/3 menace for 3. 1 in a black, tap, sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This type of effect can be very powerful if you are going wide. So if you have a lot of tokens, for example, if you have a lot of like 1/1 bodies, if you've got a lot of small creatures, all of a sudden being able to just pay 2, sack one of those little, if you can sacrifice a 1/1 token you don't care about to this ability and buff the rest of your team, that can add up very quickly. Like, very quickly. This card actually, I wanted to talk about it because it gives me vibes and reminds me very much of Soulcatcher's Airy. If you're not familiar with Soulcatcher's Airy, it was an enchantment from, I believe, Judgment, that was 1 and a white. Whenever a bird you controlled, no, I think it was just whenever a bird died, you put a feather counter on it, and each bird got a +1/+1 for every feather counter on it. So as your creatures die, your survivors got big, was the idea. I'm getting that vibe from Aron, Benalia's Ruin, because you sacrifice a 1/1, the whole team gets buffed by 1. Now, granted, this is an activated ability that you need to be triggering. This also takes, you're using that ability, taps Aron, and Aron does not have Vigilance. So that does take a 3/3 body out of combat, which is relevant. However, this does put the counter on him as well. So that's pretty cool. And if you're sacrificing creatures with death triggers, like your Shambling Ghasts and Eye Twitches, which unfortunately you're going to be leaving standard, but in in other decks, that could be really great. I can also see this working with like Wedding Announcement, that style of deck. This can also be activated instant speed. No big deal, just throwing that out there. But with cards like Wedding Announcement or Edgar, Charmed Groom, that is going to be producing those little tokens repeatedly, I can see this card slotting into that style of Orzhov deck and providing a surprising amount of value. Now, the 3-drop slot is already a bit clogged. There are a lot of great cards at 3 that pretty much every color wants to be playing. So I don't know if Aron is going to be... Also, I just love that his name's Aron. Like, there was a Siren from Commander Legends named Malcolm. We now have just a dude named Aron. Anyway. But I think this card is actually really solid. It's a cool design. I like it a lot. Neat stuff. So there's a good chance we'll see it. Yeah, it'll probably see play somewhere. Now, the last card that I want to touch on today is a card that is actually getting a ton of press with good reason, and that is an instant for 1 black in Cut Down. I'm so shocked that there has not been another card in Magic's history just called Cut Down. I'm amazed they were able to get that here, but they did. It wasn't already a card. Here we go. Here we are. So instant black for 1, destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. This card has been compared to Fatal Push, and fairly so. With Fatal Push, you can destroy a creature with mana value 2 or less for 1 mana. And if you get the Revolt trigger, it can be 4 mana value or less. Okay, great. Like, Obviously, Fatal Push is awesome. The card sees eternal play for a very good reason. And Cut Down does something similar. You can destroy a relatively small creature for 1 mana. And there are a lot. I mean, there are a lot of 3/2s for 2 running around out there that just get iced to this beautifully. Like the Iconoclast we were looking at earlier, you can cut that down. There are a lot of cool like combo pieces that this just completely eradicates. You know, you can hit a Thalia with this comfortably, although you'd have to spend 2 if Thalia's on the board, but worth it. Even cards like Redain, like there are some great 3-drops, although that's going to be leaving standard. But still, there are some killer 3-drops that, you know, you can take out with this. There are a lot of powerful like combo pieces that are like 1/4s. You know, that those are all of a sudden viable targets for this. You know, if they have some kind of crazy ability on them, but their stats are really low, all of a sudden Cut Down can take them down. Like, I think this card is going to see immediate play. Like, I really, I mean, I'd be shocked if we don't see... you know, it looks like there's going to be some form of mono black control deck post rotation, just because of how much juice that deck is getting. I would be very surprised if Cut Down is not a piece of it, because it buys you time against aggro decks in the early game, and like I was saying, against decks that care about comboing stuff. I mean, just on its face right now, this can deal with a Fable the Mirror Breaker. The reflection, it can kill the Goblin Shaman token it creates, or you can blow up the reflection of Kiki Jiki itself with this. That's a killer target that you see everywhere. It also deals with Tenacious Underdog, granted just for 1 turn, but still, yet 1 turn might be all you need. I think the card's actually really good. Being able to destroy something for 1 mana is a big deal. It just is. It always will be. You know, that's one of the main reasons why cards like Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile or Path of Exile, whatever the card is. That's why those cards see so much play in so many formats, because being able to remove a threat from the board for 1 is always going to be relevant and always going to be a big deal. And I think Cut Down, while it's not, maybe it's not quite as good as Fatal Push. Like Fatal Push hits a lot of stuff that this doesn't. But at the same time, I think there's play here. I think Cut Down is actually really solid. It's just good. Again, we've had a couple of cards in this set so far that like aren't necessarily huge and splashy, but they're just strong. And I think Dominaria United is actually in a really good spot where the power level is such that it will impact a lot of formats without warping them. I think Standard is going to include a lot of Dominaria cards at launch, which is exactly what you want to see. And I think even in older formats, there will be a couple of these cards, and Cut Down might be the 5th or 6th copy of Fatal Push in a lot of like Explorer or Historic decks. I would not be surprised if we see that. So expect to see this card around. You know, like and be aware as you're debating on what creatures to add to your decks. If you see a 4 or 5 drop and it doesn't pass the Cut Down test, it probably needs to get cut, because well, if not, it's going to get cut down. So that's going to be a thing. So thanks so much for checking out the video. If you enjoyed this, please leave a thumbs up, as well as hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. We are approaching 1,000 subscribers, and I'm hopeful. I can't wait. So thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next one.